What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars sits down for what should be a simple interview, only to face disrespect, condescension, and attacks on everything he stands for? In just 36 seconds of shocking comments, a daytime talk show host would destroy any chance of a civil conversation and push a guest to do something rarely seen on live television. This is the story of how Tamron Hall turned a routine promotional appearance into one of the most uncomfortable moments in talk show history. Before we get into this unbelievable exchange, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us your thoughts on what went down. Now let's dive into this disaster. Mark Wahlberg walked onto the set that afternoon, expecting a standard interview. He was there to promote his latest film, talk about his projects, maybe share some stories about working with the cast. These kinds of appearances are routine for actors. They sit down, they chat, they laugh, they promote their work, and everyone goes home happy. That's how it's supposed to work. But from the very moment Mark sat down, something felt off. Tamron Hall had this look on her face, this expression that seemed almost dismissive. Mark smiled, greeted her warmly, thanked her for having him on the show. He was professional, courteous, everything you'd expect from someone who's done hundreds of these interviews over the years. Tamron barely acknowledged his greeting. She shuffled her note cards, glanced at the camera, and then turned to Mark with what can only be described as a forced smile. "So Mark," she began, her tone already carrying an edge, "you're here to talk about your new movie. Another action film. Another tough guy role. Do you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over again?" Right out of the gate, it was an odd question. Not a warm welcome, not an easy opening to make the guest comfortable. Just an immediate jab at his career choices. Mark, to his credit, handled it with grace. "Well, I wouldn't say it's the same character," Mark replied, keeping his tone friendly. "Each role has its own challenges, its own story to tell. This particular film is about a father trying to protect his family, and I think that's something a lot of people can relate to." Tamron leaned back in her chair, not even pretending to be interested in his answer. "A father protecting his family," she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How original. It seems like every movie you do has you playing some version of a hero. Do you think maybe you're stuck in a box? Like Hollywood doesn't see you as capable of anything else?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. You could feel the tension starting to build. This wasn't playful banter. This wasn't a host trying to have an interesting conversation. This was someone actively trying to belittle their guest on live television. Mark's smile tightened just a bit, but he remained professional. "I don't think I'm stuck in a box at all," he said. "I've done comedies, dramas, action films. I've worked with incredible directors on all kinds of projects. I choose roles that speak to me, that I think will resonate with audiences." "That you think will make money? You mean—" Tamron cut in, not even letting him finish his thought completely. "Let's be honest, Mark. You make movies that sell tickets. You're not exactly doing Shakespeare in the Park, are you?" The audience gasped. A few people laughed nervously, unsure if this was some kind of bit or if their host was actually being this rude to a guest. Mark's expression changed slightly. The friendliness was still there, but you could see he was processing what was happening, trying to figure out where this was coming from. "I'm proud of the work I do," Mark said, his voice steady but firmer now. "I make movies that entertain people. I don't think there's anything wrong with that." "Of course there's nothing wrong with it," Tamron said, waving her hand dismissively. "But let's not pretend you're some kind of artist. You're a product. You sell a brand. Tough guy Mark Wahlberg, the guy from Boston who talks tough and flexes his muscles. That's the brand, isn't it?" This was getting worse by the second. Mark sat there, clearly taken aback by the hostility. He wasn't being defensive or aggressive. He was just trying to understand why he was being attacked for doing his job. "I think you're simplifying what I do," Mark said carefully. "Acting is more than just showing up and saying lines. There's preparation, there's emotional work, there's collaboration with dozens of talented people to tell a story." Tamron laughed. Actually laughed at him. "Emotional work," she repeated mockingly. "Mark, come on. You run around, you shoot guns, you punch people. What emotional work are you doing? You're not exactly Daniel Day-Lewis." The audience was dead silent now. This had gone beyond uncomfortable. This was just mean. Mark looked at Tamron for a long moment, and you could see him making a decision. He could fire back, get into an argument, make this even uglier, or he could try one more time to steer this back to something reasonable. "I respect your opinion," Mark said, choosing his words carefully, "but I didn't come here to be insulted. I came here to talk about a film that a lot of people worked really hard on. If you want to have a conversation about that, great. If not, maybe we should just end this now." It was a fair boundary to set, a completely reasonable response to being disrespected. Any professional host would have recognized they'd crossed a line and would have tried to reset the conversation, but Tamron Hall wasn't interested in being professional. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Did I hurt your feelings, Mark? Is the tough guy from Boston getting a little sensitive? Maybe you're not as tough as you play in the movies." That was it. That was the moment. Mark stared at her, his jaw tight, and you could see him processing whether this was even worth engaging with anymore. "You know what?" Mark said, his voice calm but final. "I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be talked to like this." "Oh, here we go," Tamron said, rolling her eyes. "The big star can't handle a few tough questions. What happened to all that Boston toughness you're always talking about?" "Tough questions are fine," Mark replied, his patience clearly at its end. "Disrespect isn't. There's a difference." "I'm just being honest," Tamron shot back. "Maybe you're just not used to someone not kissing up to you. Maybe you surround yourself with yes men who tell you everything you do is brilliant, and you can't handle it when someone tells you the truth." Mark shook his head slowly. He reached up and unclipped his microphone from his shirt. "What are you doing?" Tamron asked, a hint of surprise in her voice for the first time. "I'm done," Mark said simply. He placed the microphone on the table next to him and started to stand up. "You're walking out?" Tamron said, and now she sounded almost gleeful about it, like this was exactly what she wanted. "You're really going to walk off my show because you can't handle a little criticism?" "This isn't criticism," Mark said, standing up fully now. "This is you being disrespectful for no reason. I don't know what I did to you. I don't know why you're acting like this, but I'm not going to sit here and be your punching bag." The audience didn't know what to do. Some people started clapping, supporting Mark. Others just sat in stunned silence. The producers were clearly panicking, trying to figure out what to do. "This is so typical," Tamron said, raising her voice as Mark started to walk away. "A man can't handle a strong woman asking him real questions, so he runs away. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're not tough at all." Mark stopped walking. He turned back to face her, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled, but you could hear the anger underneath. "A strong woman asks tough questions?" Mark said. "What you're doing isn't strength, it's just being rude. There's a difference, and if you can't see that, then I feel sorry for you." "Don't feel sorry for me," Tamron snapped. "I'm not the one running away from an interview because my feelings got hurt." "My feelings aren't hurt," Mark said. "I'm just not going to waste my time with someone who clearly has no respect for me or for what I do. You want to sit here and tear people down to make yourself feel important? Go ahead, but you're going to have to do it without me." He turned and walked off the stage. Just like that. One of the biggest movie stars in the world, walking off a daytime talk show because the host had created such a toxic environment that there was no point in staying. Tamron sat there, looking at the camera, trying to maintain her composure. "Well," she said, attempting to sound unbothered, "I guess Mark Wahlberg doesn't like tough interviews. We'll be right back after this break." But you could see it on her face. She knew she'd messed up. She knew she'd crossed a line. And she knew that this was going to be the story everyone talked about. As the show cut to commercial, the audience was buzzing. People were talking to each other, looking confused, looking uncomfortable. The producers were rushing around, clearly in crisis mode, and Mark was already gone, out of the building, done with the whole thing. What made this whole situation so shocking was how unnecessary it was. Mark Wahlberg is known for being a genuinely nice guy in interviews. He shows up, he's professional, he's funny, he tells good stories. There was no reason for any of this to happen. Tamron had created this hostile environment completely on her own, and the questions she was asking weren't even tough questions. They were just insults dressed up as questions. There's a way to challenge a guest, to ask them interesting or provocative things, to dig deeper into their work or their choices, but that's not what this was. This was a host who seemed to have decided before the interview even started that she was going to make her guest uncomfortable, that she was going to attack him, that she was going to try to make him look bad. Why would she do that? What was the point? Some people speculated later that maybe she was trying to create a viral moment, trying to be edgy, trying to show that she wasn't going to softball her guests. But there's a massive difference between being a tough interviewer and being outright disrespectful. The best interviewers know how to challenge their guests while still maintaining respect. They know how to ask difficult questions without being insulting. They know how to create interesting television without humiliating the people they're talking to. Tamron Hall showed none of that skill in this interview. From the very first question, she was dismissive of Mark's career, of his choices, of his work. She mocked him, belittled him, and then acted surprised when he'd finally had enough. She pushed and pushed until she got exactly what she wanted, which was a dramatic moment. But at what cost? Because here's the thing, Mark Wahlberg didn't lose anything from this exchange. If anything, he came out looking better. He was patient. He was professional. He tried multiple times to redirect the conversation to something productive. He set reasonable boundaries, and when those boundaries were ignored, he removed himself from the situation. That's not being weak. That's actually being pretty mature. Tamron, on the other hand, came across as petty, mean-spirited, and unprofessional. She had a huge star on her show, someone who could have helped her ratings, someone who had interesting things to talk about, and she wasted that opportunity by turning it into a personal attack session. Let's go back and look at some of the specific things she said, because they're pretty revealing. When she asked if he was tired of playing the same character, that's not really a question. That's an accusation. She was essentially saying, "You're boring and repetitive." A real question would have been something like, "You've done a lot of action roles. What draws you to that genre?" Same topic, but approached with curiosity instead of contempt. When she said he wasn't doing Shakespeare in the Park, she was implying that his work wasn't legitimate art, that it wasn't worthy of respect. But millions of people enjoy Mark Wahlberg's movies. They find entertainment, escapism, and sometimes even meaning in the stories he helps tell. Why is that less valuable than theater? It's not. It's just different. But Tamron was using it as a weapon to make him feel small. When she called him a product, a brand, she was trying to dehumanize him. She was saying he's not a real person with talent and skill. He's just a marketing tool. How is that an appropriate way to talk to anyone, let alone a guest on your show? And then the worst part, when she mocked the idea of him doing emotional work as an actor, acting is emotional work. Even in action movies, even in comedies. You have to tap into feelings, you have to be vulnerable, you have to connect with your character and with your scene partners. Dismissing that is dismissing the entire craft of acting. Throughout all of this, Mark kept trying to explain his perspective, to defend his work without being defensive, to maintain some kind of dignity. And Tamron just kept attacking. The comment about him not being able to handle a strong woman was particularly gross, because that's not what was happening at all. Mark wasn't uncomfortable with a strong woman. He was uncomfortable with a rude host. Gender had nothing to do with it. If a male host had treated him the same way, he probably would have walked off too. But Tamron tried to make it about gender, tried to make it seem like Mark was some kind of sexist who couldn't handle being questioned by a woman. That wasn't it at all, and she knew it. She was hiding behind identity politics to excuse her bad behavior. And that's not okay. You don't get to be disrespectful to people and then claim it's actually about them being prejudiced when they call you out on it. The audience reaction during all of this was really telling. At first, people weren't sure what was happening. They laughed nervously at some of Tamron's early jabs, maybe thinking it was some kind of roast format. But as it continued, as it got meaner and more personal, the laughter stopped. People got quiet. They got uncomfortable. And when Mark finally stood up to leave, a significant portion of the audience applauded him. They supported his decision to remove himself from that toxic situation. That's not what you want as a talk show host. You don't want your audience siding with the guest against you. You don't want to create an environment so uncomfortable that people are relieved when someone leaves. That's a failure of hosting. When Mark gave her that final response, when he explained the difference between a strong woman asking tough questions and just being rude, he was absolutely right. And Tamron had no comeback for it. She just tried to get the last word in, tried to frame it as him running away, but everyone could see the truth. He wasn't running away. He was choosing not to participate in something pointless and degrading. Think about what Mark said in that moment. You want to sit here and tear people down to make yourself feel important? Go ahead. But you're going to have to do it without me. That's powerful. That's someone who knows their worth, who knows they don't have to subject themselves to mistreatment just because there's a camera on them. Too often, people in these situations feel trapped. They feel like they have to sit there and take it because they're on television, because walking out would be unprofessional, because they're supposed to be promoting something. And hosts take advantage of that. They know their guests are somewhat captive, so they feel free to say things they probably wouldn't say in a normal conversation. But Mark called that bluff. He said, essentially, "I don't care if this looks bad. I'm not doing this." And you know what? It didn't look bad. It looked like someone with self-respect standing up for themselves. After he left the stage, after Tamron tried to brush it off and send the show to commercial, you have to wonder what was going through her head. Did she really think she'd handle that well? Did she really think she'd come across as some kind of hard-hitting journalist? Or did she realize in that moment that she'd just made a huge mistake? Because this wasn't going to be a story about Mark Wahlberg getting owned in an interview. This was going to be a story about a talk show host being so disrespectful to a guest that they walked off. That's the headline. That's what people were going to remember. And it's a shame, really, because talk shows should be fun. They should be a place where interesting people come to share stories, to connect with audiences, to have genuine conversations. When a host turns it into a battleground, when they decide their job is to attack rather than to engage, everyone loses. The viewers lose because instead of getting an entertaining or informative interview, they get an uncomfortable confrontation. The guest loses because they came to promote their work and instead got ambushed. And ultimately, the host loses too, because they damage their reputation and make future guests wary of appearing on their show. Who wants to go on a show where they might get treated like garbage? Who wants to sign up for an interview where the host has already decided they're going to tear you down? Nobody. And word spreads fast in Hollywood. When someone gets treated badly on a show, other people hear about it. Publicists hear about it. Managers hear about it. And they think twice before booking their clients. Tamron created a situation where Mark had to choose between his dignity and staying in his seat. And he chose his dignity. That's not him being weak or sensitive or unable to handle criticism. That's him being smart enough to recognize a no-win situation and extract himself from it. Throughout the entire exchange, Mark never raised his voice. He never insulted Tamron personally. He never tried to attack her the way she was attacking him. He just calmly, clearly stated that he wasn't going to tolerate being disrespected, and then he followed through on that. That takes strength. That takes confidence. That takes knowing who you are and not needing to prove anything to someone who's already decided to think the worst of you. Compare that to Tamron's behavior. She was antagonistic from the start. She interrupted him. She mocked him. She twisted his words. She tried to bait him into an argument, and when he refused to engage with her negativity, when he simply chose to leave, she tried to make it seem like he was the problem. She tried to make it about him being unable to handle her, rather than about her being unable to conduct a professional interview. That's deflection. That's someone who knows they've done wrong but isn't willing to admit it. So instead, they double down. They try to make the other person look bad. They try to control the narrative. But it doesn't work when everyone just watched what actually happened. The phrase gaslighting gets thrown around a lot these days, but this was a pretty clear example of it. Tamron spent the entire interview being rude and dismissive, and then when Mark called her out on it, she tried to pretend that wasn't what had happened. She tried to act like she was just asking tough questions, and he couldn't handle it. But everyone saw the truth. Everyone saw what she was really doing. What's interesting is that Mark gave her multiple chances to change course. He didn't walk off after the first rude question. He didn't even walk off after the second or third. He kept trying to have a normal conversation. He kept responding professionally. He even explicitly told her that he felt disrespected and asked if they could talk about the film instead. He gave her an out. He gave her a chance to reset. She didn't take it. She doubled down. She got worse. And that's when he left. Some people might say that Mark should have stuck it out, that he should have finished the interview no matter what. But why? Why should anyone have to sit there and be verbally abused just because they agreed to come on a television show? There's no contract that says you have to tolerate mistreatment. There's no rule that says you can't stand up for yourself. In fact, by leaving, Mark probably did future guests on that show a favor. He showed that there are consequences for being a bad host. He showed that you can't just treat people however you want and expect them to sit there and take it. Maybe, hopefully, Tamron learned something from this experience. Maybe she realized that being provocative is fine, but being cruel isn't. Maybe she understood that there's a line, and she crossed it. Or maybe she didn't learn anything. Maybe she went into her next interview with the same attitude, the same approach. But at least Mark made it clear where his boundaries were. At least he stood up for himself. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 or 15 minutes from start to finish. But in that short time, Tamron managed to completely derail what should have been a simple, pleasant conversation. She created conflict where there didn't need to be any. She made her guest uncomfortable, made her audience uncomfortable, and turned what could have been a positive experience for everyone into a disaster. And for what? What did she gain from this? A viral moment, maybe. People talking about her show, but not in a good way. People weren't saying, "Wow, Tamron Hall is such a great interviewer." They were saying, "Wow, Tamron Hall was incredibly rude to Mark Wahlberg." That's not the kind of attention you want. That's not building a positive reputation. That's damaging your brand. which is ironic considering she accused Mark of just being a brand himself. The contrast between how Mark conducted himself and how Tamron conducted herself couldn't be more stark. He was respectful even when she wasn't. He was patient even when she was attacking him. He tried to de-escalate even when she was escalating. And when it became clear that there was no path forward, he removed himself with dignity. She, on the other hand, was combative, dismissive, mocking, and ultimately unrepentant. She showed no interest in actually connecting with her guest or giving him a fair platform. She just wanted to score points, to look tough, to create drama. Well, she created drama, but not the kind that makes you look good. One of the things that made this so uncomfortable to watch was that it felt personal. It felt like Tamron had some kind of vendetta against Mark, even though there was no apparent reason for it. They didn't have any known history. There was no public feud. So why was she treating him this way? Maybe she thought it would make for good television. Maybe she thought being confrontational would set her show apart. Maybe she was having a bad day and took it out on her guest. Or maybe she genuinely believed she was doing some kind of important journalism by not going easy on a celebrity. But here's the thing. There's a huge difference between asking challenging questions and being disrespectful. You can ask someone about their career choices, their artistic decisions, their public statements, all of that, without being condescending or insulting. Good interviewers do it all the time. Tamron didn't do that. She went straight for personal attacks. She questioned his intelligence, his talent, his authenticity. That's not journalism. That's just being mean. And Mark recognized that. He saw through what she was trying to do, and he refused to play along. That's actually pretty impressive. A lot of people, when they're being attacked on live television, either shut down completely or lash out. Mark did neither. He stayed calm, he stayed articulate, and he made a clear decision about what he was and wasn't willing to tolerate. The moment when he unclipped his microphone was so powerful because it was so decisive. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. He'd made up his mind, and he followed through. That's leadership. That's self-respect. That's knowing your worth. And Tamron's reaction, trying to mock him for leaving, trying to make it about him being unable to handle a strong woman, just made her look worse. Because everyone could see what had really happened. Everyone could see that she'd created an unbearable situation, and he'd chosen not to participate in it anymore. The audience's reaction throughout this whole thing was also really interesting. At the beginning, they were tentatively engaged, not sure what to make of Tamron's aggressive questioning style. As it got worse, they got quieter, more uncomfortable, and when Mark finally stood up to leave, a good portion of them applauded. They were supporting him. They were acknowledging that what was happening wasn't okay. That's a pretty damning indictment of how Tamron handled the interview. Your own audience, the people who came to see your show, were cheering for your guest to leave. That should tell you something. Mark's final words to her were so spot on. If you can't see the difference between strength and being rude, then I feel sorry for you. That was the perfect encapsulation of everything that was wrong with her approach. She thought she was being strong, but she was just being rude. She thought she was being a tough interviewer, but she was just being unprofessional. Real strength in an interview setting is about asking difficult questions while still respecting your guest. It's about challenging ideas without attacking the person. It's about creating an environment where honest, meaningful conversation can happen. Tamron did none of those things. She created a hostile environment from the very start, and she maintained that hostility throughout. There was no moment where she showed genuine curiosity about Mark's work, his process, his experiences. There was no moment where she seemed interested in actually learning anything or giving her audience insight into who he is as a person and as an artist. It was all performance, all posturing, all trying to look tough and edgy at her guest's expense. And it backfired completely. Because now, instead of people talking about Mark's new movie or anything interesting he might have shared in the interview, people are talking about how badly Tamron treated him. Instead of people remembering a great conversation, they're remembering an uncomfortable confrontation. Instead of this being a positive moment for her show, it's a black mark on her reputation. Mark walked off that stage with his head held high. He didn't storm off. He didn't make a scene. He didn't throw things or curse or do anything dramatic. He simply said, "This isn't acceptable, and I'm not participating in it anymore." And then he left. Calmly, purposefully, with complete conviction. That's the behavior of someone who knows exactly who they are and doesn't need validation from someone who's already decided not to give it. That's someone who values themselves enough to walk away from a bad situation, even when there might be professional consequences. That's someone who understands that no promotional opportunity is worth sacrificing your dignity. Tamron, sitting there after he left, trying to maintain her composure, trying to pretend everything was fine, trying to act like this was somehow Mark's fault, looked like exactly what she was at that point. A host who had completely lost control of her interview and was desperately trying to save face. But you can't save face when everyone just watched you systematically disrespect someone for no good reason. You can't pretend you were just doing your job, when your job is to facilitate interesting conversations, not to create conflict for its own sake. This whole situation could have been so different if Tamron had approached the interview with even a basic level of respect, if she'd been interested in actually talking to Mark rather than at him. If she'd asked genuine questions instead of making veiled insults, it could have been a great segment. Mark is a charismatic guy with interesting stories. He's been in the business for decades. He's worked with incredible people. There was so much they could have talked about. Instead, they talked about nothing because Tamron was too busy trying to tear him down to actually have a conversation. She wasted her time. She wasted his time. She wasted her audience's time, and she damaged her own credibility in the process. The saddest part is that this kind of thing happens more often than it should. Hosts who think being provocative or confrontational makes for good television. Hosts who confuse conflict with content. Hosts who forget that their primary job is to make their guests feel comfortable enough to open up and share something interesting. When a guest walks onto your set, they're putting a certain amount of trust in you. They're trusting that you're going to treat them fairly, that you're going to give them a platform to share their message, that you're going to have a respectful exchange even if you disagree on things. When you violate that trust, when you ambush them or attack them or treat them as less than, you're not just being a bad host, you're being a bad person. Mark Wahlberg deserved better than what he got from Tamron Hall that day. He came to her show in good faith, ready to promote his work and have a conversation. He was met with hostility, condescension, and disrespect. And when he'd finally had enough, when he chose to remove himself from that toxic environment, she tried to make him look bad for it. But it didn't work. Because everyone could see the truth. Everyone could see who was being reasonable and who was being unreasonable. Everyone could see who was trying to have a civil interaction and who was determined to create conflict. In the end, Mark walked away from that interview with his dignity intact and his reputation enhanced. He showed grace under pressure. He showed self-respect. He showed that you don't have to tolerate mistreatment just because someone has a television show. Tamron, on the other hand, walked away, having revealed some pretty ugly things about her approach to interviewing and to treating people in general. She showed that she's willing to attack her guests for no reason. She showed that she values creating drama over creating meaningful content. She showed that when someone sets a reasonable boundary with her, she'll try to tear them down for it. That's not the kind of person you want hosting a talk show. That's not the kind of person you want representing your network. That's not the kind of person you want to give a platform to. This whole situation was a masterclass in how not to conduct an interview and in how to handle yourself when someone is treating you badly. Mark gave a clinic in maintaining composure, setting boundaries, and knowing when to walk away. Tamron gave a clinic in how to alienate your guests, your audience, and anyone watching at home. If there's a lesson to be learned from all of this, it's that respect is non-negotiable. It doesn't matter if you're a big star or a talk show host or just a regular person. Everyone deserves to be treated with basic human decency. And when someone refuses to give you that, you have every right to remove yourself from the situation. Mark Wahlberg understood that. Tamron Hall, unfortunately, did not. The interview that should have been a routine promotional appearance became one of the most talked about moments in recent talk show history. But not for any good reason. Not because something interesting was revealed or because there was a great conversation. It became famous because of how badly one person treated another and because the person being mistreated had the courage to say enough is enough. That's the real story here. Not that a celebrity walked off a talk show, but that a professional person refused to be disrespected and chose dignity over obligation. That's something we should all be able to relate to and respect, regardless of how we feel about Mark Wahlberg as an actor or about Tamron Hall as a host. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't really about movies or television or fame or any of that. It was about basic respect between two human beings. And one of them forgot that, while the other one never did. Mark walked off that stage and probably never thought about it again. He moved on with his life, his career, his family. He didn't need that interview. He didn't need that show. He certainly didn't need to be treated that way. Tamron, sitting there after he left, had to finish her show and face the consequences of her choices. She had to deal with the fallout from creating such a spectacularly uncomfortable moment. She had to answer questions about why she'd been so hostile to a guest who'd done nothing to deserve it. In those 36 seconds of shocking comments that pushed everything over the edge, Tamron revealed who she really was, as an interviewer and as a person. And Mark revealed who he was too. The difference between those two revelations is stark and telling. One person showed us grace, patience, and self-respect. The other showed us pettiness, hostility, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be a good host. One person emerged from this looking better than ever. The other person emerged having done serious damage to their own reputation, and that's exactly how it should be. Because when you treat people badly, there should be consequences. And when you stand up for yourself with dignity and class, that should be recognized and respected. Mark Wahlberg walked off Tamron Hall's show that day, but in doing so, he walked right into a much better story about himself. A story about integrity, about boundaries, about knowing your worth. That's a much better narrative than anything he could have said about his movie. And Tamron Hall, trying to create a moment, trying to be edgy, trying to make her mark, ended up creating the wrong kind of moment entirely. She made her mark, all right, just not the one she was hoping for. That's what happens when you forget that the people you interview are not just celebrities or guests or promotional opportunities. They're human beings who deserve respect. And when you fail to give them that, don't be surprised when they decide they have better things to do than sit there and take it. Mark Wahlberg certainly did, and good for him.